Guys, in this video, let us look at the differences between quarantine and the word isolation. So you should know what the difference is, right? So basically, quarantine is a separation or limitation of freedom of movements, okay? So let us look at the ship, right? On the ship, people are quarantined. They cannot get off the ship, right? They are not in any hospital. They are living their own lives, but they are not allowed to mingle with other people. This is quarantine. Now, when it comes to isolation, this is a person, right, who is infected. And this person is under isolation, okay, infected, isolation, okay. They are ill or infected is isolation, okay. Quarantined is only people who have been exposed to specific illness. Now, in this example, let us say coronavirus, right. So, coronavirus, these people are exposed to, right. So, basically, these people are quarantined, though they are not having any symptoms, they don't have illness, they are not infected, they are exposed, okay. Isolation is when the person has the illness, the person is infected, then this person is isolated, okay. So, quarantine is separation or limitation of freedom of movement, okay, because they are exposed to communicable disease, which, and for how long will they be under quarantine? For a duration, okay. First understand, for any disease, there will be an incubation period, right? For a disease, there will be what? There will be an incubation period. Now, let us say this is the longest incubation period. The incubation period, let us say it is some 10 to 14 days, right? Then you will take the longest incubation period, that is 14 days. So, they will be quarantined for how many days? For 14 to 15 days, they will be quarantined. They should not be quarantined for longer than the longest incubation period, okay? Or to say in other words, they will be quarantined for this much duration. How much duration? The longest incubation period. For that much time, they will be quarantined, okay. So basically, what are you doing? You're in quarantine, isolation, both you're doing only one thing, you're stopping the spread of the disease, right? Now, who and all get quarantined? Because they have been exposed to a specific illness, but they are not sick, they do not have symptoms, okay. So basically, these people will be quarantined. Now, what is the reason for quarantine? Because some infections can spread even before the person knows that he has any symptoms. So, till they show symptoms, during that incubation period, that much time, let them be quarantined. Okay, if they don't show any symptoms, that means they did not develop the disease and they do not have the disease and they will be let off. Okay. Whom does this benefit? It actually does not benefit these people much because they may or may not get infected, right? But it will definitely protect the people around, right? It will benefit the other people. In this case also same thing. It will benefit the people around. Okay. A person is usually quarantined in his or her own home, airport, seaport, like this is a ship, right? So, in such places, they will be quarantined. Okay. At their home or in the airport or in the seaport, right? They can be quarantined. Quarantine is a primary level of prevention. So, basically, it is specific protection. So, it is like for these people who are around, right, for them it is primary protection. You are preventing the disease from occurring in a another person. For them it will be primary prevention, right. So, the quarantine period is equal to the maximum incubation period of disease, right, that much you have understood. So, sometimes you not only quarantine some individuals, you quarantine their entire family, right. So, in such cases, what they do when they need to quarantine people, like let us say in a city there is some outbreak of a disease, right. Let us take a different color. So, let us say in a city, there is an outbreak of a disease. So, what they will do? This entire city they will seal off and quarantine all these people in the city, right. So, they will make announcements on TV, radio, newspaper or other media. And people will be informed with the quarantine. And these specific people who have the disease will be under isolation, right? Then, so basically the states will have the authority to declare and enforce quarantine within their borders. Examples for quarantine, like you can say coronavirus, plague, right? Yellow fever, cholera, all of those can be examples, okay? Plague, coronavirus you have heard of. right? Coronavirus. Then you have heard of yellow fever, right? Cholera. So in these cases they can quarantine. Now coming to isolation, guys, let us understand isolation now. So basically when it comes to isolation, so basically here the keywords are ill or infected, right? So the separation of infected people or animal, right? So this can apply quarantine, isolation, this can affect even animals, guys. Animals and humans, for both of them these terms can apply. So any infected animal or person can be kept in isolation, okay? So that you will not spread the disease agent to others, okay? So are you understanding, guys? So just a small question for you. What are we studying? Quarantine versus isolation. So isolation is for whom? For ill or infected people, okay? So basically, whom does this benefit? Definitely it benefits the people around, right? And the isolation, where will it be done? It can be there at home. It can be done at home. It can be at hospital, okay? So it is possible anywhere, okay? So basically here, this is a secondary prevention for this person. For this person, it can be a secondary prevention or a tertiary prevention. Basically, he has the disease now, so they have to prevent complications and also disability limitation, etc. So this is going to be, for this person, it is going to be secondary or tertiary prevention. But for people around, it will still be a primary protection because these people around haven't got the disease, right? Till what time will we isolate? What is the duration of isolation? Duration of isolation will be till the person recovers, right? And also he should not be carrying this agent anymore, okay? Because he should not become a latent carrier and still spread the disease, right? So he should recover and he should not even be a carrier. That is what I feel. Okay, then what about the government? The health officials will write orders to isolate the person. So they will have to follow that. In most cases, isolation will be voluntary. However, it can happen that they can be ordered to be isolated. Isolation again refers to the same diseases. You can say plague, cholera, chicken pox. Chicken pox, don't forget, guys. Chicken pox. Chicken pox. So write all these names also here. Okay, same names you write here. And just remember chicken pox, salmonellosis. So all this you have to isolate. Salmonellosis is like typhoid, right? So they will be isolated till 3 stool cultures become negative. Okay, 3 stool cultures should be negative. Only then they will be allowed to go. Okay. So this is the difference between quarantine and isolation. In this quarantine, guys, there are a few other terminologies. So under quarantine itself, you have lot of types of quarantine are there. Like under quarantine, you have absolute quarantine, partial quarantine or modified quarantine. Then you have segregation. Okay. So this quarantine basically, it came initially, it means 40 days. That's what. Okay. But that is not there now, right? It is the longest incubation period of the disease. For that duration, they will be kept quarantined, right? Limitation of freedom of movement, right? So it was first applied in the 16th century for plague, okay? So quarantine was first done for which disease? For plague in the 14th century, okay, in Europe. So what is absolute quarantine? Whatever you heard till now is absolute quarantine, guys. Absolute quarantine is restriction of movement, etc. Then what becomes partial quarantine, right? So absolute quarantine you have seen already, okay. Now let us look at what partial quarantine means. See, partial quarantine means it is like selective or partial limitation of movement, like the child cannot go to school, okay. So this is practice for chicken pox, scabies, diphtheria, etc. Okay, it is like exclusive of children from school, right? Exclusion of children from school. Then you have another terminology here called segregation. The segregation is really strange. It is like a removal of susceptible children and remove them and put them in homes of immune people. Interesting. Okay. Then let us move on to some more details. So basically, there is something called as international quarantine also. International quarantine is like to prevent the import of exotic disease, right? Any traveler, okay, basically if he's traveling without any certificate of vaccination for that disease, then he will be quarantined at the international seaport or airport for the duration. Which duration? Longest incubation period of that disease, okay? This quarantine, that 40-day quarantine, right, which was done before, that 40-day quarantine is not there anymore. Now it has been replaced by active surveillance, okay? So, but the quarantine we have seen in case of coronavirus. So guys, let us say somebody came to a mosquito, let us say there is an endemic zone for malaria, and this person, he has come here, visited, okay, and he is going back now. So what he will do, when he is leaving the infected area also, he can be quarantined, right, by the other country to which he is going, or even wherever they think is right. So he will be put in a mosquito-proof ward for 6 days. For 6 days, they will keep him for observation, okay, after leaving the infected area. The first international quarantine rules were adopted in 1852. The rules, okay, the rules for this was adopted in 1852. And now it is under WHO. Guys, there is one law here that you should know, some regulation called as International Aerial and Maritime Traffic Regulations. International Aerial and Maritime Traffic Regulations. Okay. There is strict enforcement of these regulations in regards to quarantine to prevent international spread of disease. So what is this? International Aerial and Maritime Traffic Regulations. Okay. So I think this much is enough for quarantine versus isolation. Hope you have understood that isolation is done for whom? For the ill or infected. For the ill or infected people, they will do. Okay. So if you remember, a good example for isolation was Typhoid Mary. She is in isolation, though she's not ill as such. She doesn't have any symptoms, but she was a carrier, right? So she was infected. And she was spreading the disease, that is typhoid, to many people, and a lot of people died because she was cooking food for them. And it happened in so many cases that she was warned not to cook, and still she continued to cook, and many people used to die, right? Actually, in her case, they are using the word isolation and quarantine variably, okay? Because she is a carrier, they are using her very variably. But actually, she should be in isolation without unclean hands and all. If she touches others, she'll be passing the infection. Okay. So yes, so Typhoid Mary should be under isolation. Isolation is the right word. Maybe to not this extent, but at least she should not be touching with unclean hands, etc. Okay. So what else, guys? So we are done with quarantine versus isolation. See you in the next video. Bye bye.